The times when this thing has an impulse to pull out this camera is so strange to me. It doesn't make any sense. It's literally the middle of the night right now. And for whatever reason, what is wanting to come through is speaking more on psychedelics, and specifically psychedelics in the context of awakening, non-duality, enlightenment, use freedom, use whatever word that you care to use. There's so many words that we use to try to describe something that's totally ineffable. But, it's interesting that I find a subtle fear response arising here, specifically around this stuff. And such a big part of coming to just record these videos, like it's part of a process that's ongoing here. And I want to make that really clear. These videos are part of this process. And there's been such a lifetime of suppression, and part of this sharing is, those suppression functions breaking and just like coming to express what is wanting to arise and putting it on a platform that is very public. And, that just seems to be part of what's being asked here, and part of what is, it's happening, it's obvious that it's because it's what's happening. And those suppression functions, that suppression mechanism, it started so innocently, and there's different facets to this. Like when this thing was a child, I only had, I had a lot of ear issues, and I only had 20% of my hearing from my childhood. And I don't know what it is now. It's still not great. But what that created was having to refunnel so much energy into listening and trying to hear what others were saying. And so that just like very innocently created a context and like a set of beliefs that the identity kind of got funneled into listening and being like a really intent and open listener. And that just naturally suppressed what was authentically arising in a way. And there was also various ways that my family of origin functioned that further suppressed and just reinforced that identity, that what was being shared was not okay, that there wasn't space for it, that it wasn't safe, so many different things. But all of that to say was that there was these suppression functions that got built up. And they all got built up really innocently, and it's seen really clearly just how innocent all of that was, And there's no hard feelings about that anymore. Like all of that's gone. But when it comes to this topic in particular, I mentioned that there's this subtle fear response arising. And it's really interesting to be with that. And that's been honestly a really big part of this process, has been the way that this is very naturally trying and wanting to express. And a huge part of how this thing is coming to express, and it feels so natural and joyful, has to do with psychedelics in a very specific context, in a very, very specific context. And, you know, when I look at the way that the world is, the way that society is, you know, those things are gaining some steam in a lot of ways, but the context in which they're gaining popularity is so vastly different than what's arising here. And, you know, additionally, there's resistance externally, a lot of resistance, you know, in society. It's not yet accepted, and it's not only not accepted, it's illegal. So there's like a big part of this process has been working through this thing that is so naturally expressing, that feels so free and joyful about this expression, and for that to be illegal, and for that to be for there to be so much resistance, even in healing communities. You know, I recognize that the context that is coming to express here, there's resistance to. And so there's a fear response in sharing authentically, in posting something like this. You know, if there's honesty here, there's still like a subtle fear response, which is very interesting to notice. So all that said, psychedelics in the context of truth, in the context of waking up, in the context of non-duality, in the context of enlightenment. You know, I spoke to this in some ways in the previous video that I recorded, but the context is so different than the context of healing and making a person better. And, you know, when we look at the context of healing versus the context of, you know, like waking up, like truly waking up, because I saw something recently where, you know, there's something posted, it said something along the lines of, you know, waking up is akin to realizing that you're one with everything. And, you know, that can be taken in so many ways, like by a mind. A mind can take that and be like, oh, yes, I understand on a conceptual level that I am one with everything, that everything is oneness. And so therefore I am awake. And that is the slippery trap of psychedelics. And so I just want to be really mindful about the way that this is expressed. Because when psychedelics are used, there's a way that it can create more confusion. And there's a way that it can almost trap you deeper, like become a cul-de-sac of its own that you then spin in purposeful little circles within. But much of what the mind is going to think that it gains in psychedelic experiences, in the context of non-duality, in the context of truth, truth being the realization of what you actually are, what doesn't come or go, and it coming to settle in on a body level. Most of what is gained is meikyo. And I think I want to say that's a Zen Buddhist term. I could be wrong, but I know it's in some tradition. But essentially what that means is like, whatever, like that's a cul-de-sac. That's not relevant here. And most of the downloads, most of what is gained through psychedelics is meikyo. It's irrelevant. One of the major ways that psychedelics has been used here, and I'm not saying that like this process is complete, because it's, if I'm being honest, like the realization is not like an abiding thing. Like it's an ongoing process here. And so that's just to say that like take what I say lightly. But what has been found here is that psychedelics can be really wonderful in terms of emptying content from the body, emptying the beliefs and those like subtle layers of identity that get stuck physically in the body, energetically. They get patterned here and played out over and over. They have been a big teacher of surrender and letting go, and getting really comfortable with that. And in one of the first ayahuasca experiences that I had, I think it might have been the first one, a few years back at this point, I went into that, and I hear so many intentions. I want to heal this, I want to heal this, I want to understand this, I want to understand this, I want to whatever, connect with my higher self. There's so many intentions that can be gone into. But for whatever reason, this thing went in and I want to know what's true. And it was such a pure intention. Like, I want to know what's true. And what I came out with was, so it hasn't shifted since then. And there's ways that like the ego tries to reconstitute itself. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a psychedelic experience and the ego, like on the tail end of something, has had this thought arise of, I'm enlightened, here I am, I have arrived. And that's ridiculous. It's never going to happen that way. Never. Psychedelics are never gonna wake you up into abiding non-dual realization. Never. But there was an intention. I want to know what's true. I'm ready. I want to know what's true. And what was seen and what was come to was looking around, and this hasn't changed since then, which is cool, but looking around and seeing all of the dreams, all of the independent dreams, looking at other people and realizing like, they're dreaming. But at that point, it hadn't penetrated, the mirror hadn't turned itself around. It was just, look at them dreaming. Look at all these dreams. And it became so clear the ways that, something in my eye, became so clear the ways that dreams were happening in others, but that mirror hadn't turned around yet. And so it kickstarted something. And it has been essential in an emptying out process. I started playing with body modalities a few years ago. I've been a yoga practitioner, teacher for years at this point. And just have always had like a curiosity around various somatic and body-based practices, and got interested in TRE. I've heard Angelo talk about that on his channel, and others talk about modalities like that, but just got curious about that. And it shifted something here where there was like a coming to like experientially understand that like I am not the body, that the body just does what it does. And it allowed a deeper surrender into that. But what happened on the tail end of exploring TRE was that in psychedelic ceremonies, one of the biggest parts of the experience here was physical discharges. I've never been one for like visions or big downloads, and there have been ways that that's happened, but it's the context that I have like unlocked, at least in this process, has been discharging content and energy physically. So a big part of it has been shaking. And when I say shaking, I mean like from the outside probably looks like seizing, convulsing, but it has been coming to trust this thing so deeply that it feels good, and there was always an understanding that it was almost a way to bypass the mind, which was really helpful here as somebody who has had such a highly trained mind. But it was almost a way to bypass the mind, which I think was helpful, because there was always some sort of understanding in psychedelic experiences that there's something physically being discharged, and I don't need to know what it is. I don't need to understand it. I don't need to attach to it. And so it was just, and there would be, subtle ways that there would try to be an understanding, but it was just a trust, such a deep trust of, see you later. Like, whatever this is, whatever this energy, whatever this discharge is, like, it obviously isn't needed anymore, so see you later. And in coming to use them as a tool in that way, the way that this has progressed is that the further, words are so fucking weird, but the further along this process has gotten, the deeper the seeing has come to be, the experiences get lighter and lighter and lighter, where there's no visions anymore. There's no going into like some other world in the mind, some created world of visuals, and like even the visuals, like closing eyes, like I've never been one to have visions. Some people have visions, but even just the visuals of closing my eyes and seeing the kaleidoscopic stuff, that's gone. And those experiences have become so grounded in the senses and so focused on just the body, and just not just the body, but just physical discharges and 2 feet in reality. The further the more experience that I've had. And it's not something that I do super frequently. It's something that, like everything else at this point, sometimes there's just an impulse. I woke up the other morning, like earlier this week, and there was just a knowing of ayahuasca today. And I followed it. And I didn't know why, but I trusted. There's a certain level of trust that's become part of this, and it's used to open something, or maybe to discharge some sort of content in the body that then allows for, in life afterwards, allows for a seeing or an understanding to settle deeper. So the context is so different than what I see in healing circles. And it's not that context of healing is bad or that it's wrong. It's not, because psychedelics are wonderful at improving your dream, improving your sense of self. But they are powerful at deconstructing a sense of self if approached with discernment. And that's the thing. If you understand that if they're going to be utilized in this way, that most of what you gain in the experience, anything, most of what you see in the experience, most of what you might hear in the experience, most understandings that you might come to in the experience make you. It's created, but what is happening is it's creating space. If it's approached in a certain kind of way, for seeing and an understanding to then in your life settle in deeper, and for it's almost like practicing surrender. So then in your life, when those situations come up or when those opportunities come up, that it's able to be leaned into, those moments of surrendering deeper and letting the self go more deeply. And so, part of this sharing is like, or part of what's authentic here is like those, and it feels like it might sound like a paradox, but like inside it's not. It's so strange how things can seem to be paradoxes. But simultaneously, like there's a self that's been severely deconstructed here, that's still being deconstructed here in subtle ways. So there's simultaneously a seeing that there is not a self. There never was a self. But then what's naturally expressing here is something where psychedelics are just there's such a love. And there's such a deep, and it's not even a relationship. It can't even be said to be a relationship because it's not two things. It's just something that arises, something like a way that life expresses through psychedelics. And there's something like, I don't know how to explain it. Like there's almost no words for it. Like psychedelics are life itself. It is an expression of life itself, and it is like a magnificent expression. But it can be a trickster, and I love it for that. It has this trickster energy. It can trap us in thinking that we understand something, and it can trap the mind. And people come out of psychedelic experiences like, oh, I need to change my life in this way, and come out with all these to-do lists, and it's like that's more of the trap. There's never going to be a to-do list when it comes to seeing through the illusory self. You're never going to come out of a psychedelic experience with a to-do list, ever. And so there's this expression that's that's coming to feel so natural here. And speaking about psychedelics might be a big part of that. I don't know. All I can say is that that's what's happening now. That seems to be the way that a big part of the way that this expresses. And there's a lot of resistance in the world, in society, and people, and so that has generated a lot of fear in the past here. There's been a big part of this has been, there have been so many times where I've just sat in that fear and just like, I don't want this. I don't want for this to involve psychedelics. I don't want for this to involve shamanism. I don't want that. I don't want it. But then having to realize that's part of a me that is resisting life as it is expressing, as it seems to be wanting to authentically and spontaneously arise. And it's been letting all those things go. And so it's strange that in like that might seem like a paradox, that like it seems like there's a person here who's talking about psychedelics, who practices shamanism, but there's not. That's just what's happening. That's how life is expressing. And sometimes that's not what's happening, you know, for most of my day, it's like life doesn't express that way. But sometimes it does. And when it does, it's beautiful. But there's not an attachment to it, which is interesting, you know. It's been this weird thing, and I heard Suzanne talking about this in a video at some point recently, where she was talking about how like kind of the juice gets squeezed out of things, where it's like you find yourself doing something and it's not like, oh, I love this, I'm passionate about this. It's just like, this is fine. Like it's beautiful and it's wonderful, but it's like there's no difference anymore between like brushing my teeth and recording a video that I'm gonna put on the internet, or, you know, making a sandwich and facilitating a psychedelic ceremony. And it's so strange to say that, but it's like there's I don't know, it's just like everything feels the same in a way, but it's all also new and like wonderful, and there's a beauty in all of it. And so I suppose, you know, part of this video is like, especially I think as psychedelics gain more popularity, like it's unavoidable that they're going to start being talked about a lot. Not just in a healing context, but in a context of truth. And there's going to be a lot of confusion. There is already a lot of confusion. You know, I've heard several teachers, several people, Rupert and Angelo, talking about, you know, meditation in the context of coming to know from a sensory, coming to live in the senses and be in the senses, and essentially embodying the understanding that is seen, embodying on every level and letting it sink in, like what you actually are, like the untouchableness, the unfathomability, the expansiveness, the nothingness. And that meditation and certain body-based practices can really be a tool at helping that understanding come to be grounded in every aspect of the expression. And that's how I'm coming to see psychedelics, is that they're another method of that. It's a method of, or a tool that can be used to discharge stuck energies, to discharge emotions, to come to open some of those, you know, like peel off masks and layers and help to unblock some of those blocks. And that's really, when I look at it, I think for a long time in my own use of psychedelics, I didn't really understand the context or like why. There was just this impulse of just keep at it. And it was never a super consistent thing. It's not like I was doing it every day or even every week or even every month. But just an integral part of the process. And following intuition versus, like I need to do this, like almost like it's a practice. It can become another thing to attach to. But it can be used as a tool to empty those things. And, I think my last big shift was precipitated by that. I had like this bottom come up in my life where things with Henry like really, really hit a bottom, like in the relationship. And like there's just this sudden impulse of like ayahuasca. And I ended up sitting with it for 2 days. But going in, it was a defeat. Like, okay, like I'm finally ready to see myself completely clearly, to see this and the patterns totally clearly. And it was devastating. It was completely devastating because I like saw so clearly, like, oh, it's all me. Everything out that is manifesting seemingly externally, it's all these patterns, all of these ways of suppression, all of it, and seeing the innocence of it. And then it kept unfolding deeper. So it's not, thinking that like you're going to go into a psychedelic experience and come out the other side enlightened or healed is confused. It's not going to be that way. Maybe it'll create an opening, or it'll, kind of move the layers of identity out of the way enough where there's able to be like a truth let in. But then those layers of identity are gonna kind of reconstitute themselves, but they're not gonna, the solidity is not going to be there in the same way. It's going to be more fragile. So then as life continues to unfold, there's cracks there, and it's going to let things in that weren't let in before. And there's going to be a humility and a sincerity, perhaps, that, the identity softens. Again, if it's approached in a certain kind of way. And again, this is all this to say, that's just the understanding that has come to be seen here. And it's so clear here, like there's such a deep, I don't know, it's been such a deep part of this process that it's so clear here. Like it's simultaneously like nothing is known, but in the same way that you could say that, meditation when approached in a certain way is really helpful, this too. But there is going to be a lot of confusion around it. And it seems that part of the way that this wants to express is to share some of that, share the context, and because these things are going to be things that are explored and used, and most of it's going to be make-yo, unfortunately, for the ego. It sucks, but keeping that in mind and just understanding that the true intention in the heart, if you go in, if an ego goes in being like, I want to wake up, that's, the ego's never going to be, like, you are not going to be the thing that wakes up. The one who knocks, to that one will it be opened. The one who knocks, to that one will it be opened. And so just keeping that in mind. If this is something that you choose to explore, or maybe this is helpful, or I don't know, this just came through at 4:30 in the morning for some reason. I don't know. I just follow these impulses, and this is what happens. So thanks for tuning in.